Okay, let's just jump right in. We're going to peel back the layers on a potential threat to the U.S. economy, and it's all based on a pretty stark warning from a former Treasury official, David Malpass. This is a story about the people who control our money and the broken tools they might be using to do it.
So let's start with a question that should, really make you stop and think. What if the biggest danger to your job, to your savings, to your dream of buying a home isn't some big, obvious headline you see on the news? What if it's something hiding right in front of us?
And this quote right here, this is the alarm bell. According to Malpass, the Federal Reserve just waited too long to make a move. And those few words have a direct, real-world impact on your wallet. This isn't just theory. We're talking about the price ordinary people are paying right now.
Because see, when the Fed delays cutting interest rates, it's not like they're just hitting the pause button. The source material describes it as something much worse, like a slow economic suffocation. The damage that's done isn't temporary, it's real, it's permanent, and you can't just undo it later.
This lays out the whole chain reaction perfectly. It's like dominoes falling. It starts with step 1. The Fed waits too long. That directly leads to step 2. Mortgages and business loans stay painfully high. And because of that, in step 3, businesses can't grow and they stop hiring. That pain hits home in step 4, where families can start to lose everything. But here's the absolute kicker, the final domino. That damage becomes permanent.
So that brings us to the billion-dollar question. Why? Why the delay? Well, this gets to the very heart of the problem. The argument is that the Fed is trying to navigate our modern, complex economy using a map that's dangerously out of date. Just let that sink in for a minute. 50-year-old models. I mean, the source compares this to a surgeon using a medical textbook from the 1970s, or a pilot trying to fly a jet with a paper map drawn before GPS even existed. It's a pretty shocking thought when you realize what's at stake.
And this right here illustrates that mismatch so clearly. On the left, you've got the economy of the 70s. It was more or less a closed system, mostly domestic. But on the right, you have today's reality. It's global, it's interconnected, it's chaotic. Back then, labor was pretty straightforward. Now, it's being totally reshaped by AI. Inflation used to be predictable. Now it can spike because of a supply chain problem halfway around the world. The Fed's old map just doesn't match this new territory.
So here's a quick rundown of exactly why these old models are failing. They assume the U.S. economy is an island. They completely misunderstand what drives inflation today. And this one is huge. They often see good news, like productivity growth from new technology, as a bad thing, as a threat. They're basically looking at a brand new world through a really old, cracked lens.
So what happens when you use the wrong map? Well, you start making bad predictions. And when you keep making bad predictions, people, in this case, the markets, they stop trusting you. And that leads us to the next big problem, a breakdown of trust, which means the Fed starts to lose control.
I'm sure this is a question millions of people have been asking. You hear on the news that the Fed cut its main rate, but then your mortgage payment doesn't seem to get any cheaper. What's going on there? The answer really shines a light on this whole trust problem.
Okay, so here's the key. The Fed doesn't actually set your mortgage rate. That rate is tied to something called the 10-year Treasury yield, and that yield is all about long-term confidence. If the big investors out there don't trust the Fed's long-term plan for the economy, that yield stays high, and so do your mortgage rates. It's like the Fed is pulling a lever, but the chain connected to it is broken. They're losing control over the rates that actually matter most to you and me.
So, is there a better way? The source material suggests there is. It's called a price rule monetary policy. Now, it sounds complicated, but the idea is actually simple. Instead of the Fed constantly reacting and trying to micromanage everything, this model sets up clear, predictable rules for the long run. The goal is just long-term stability for prices and for the dollar. Think of it less like a frantic driver constantly hitting the gas and the brake, and more like setting a reliable cruise control for the economy. The whole idea is to rebuild that confidence that's been lost.
But changing the entire model? That's not just some technical fix. Oh no. It is a huge political and philosophical battle. And that battle is happening right now, inside the Federal Reserve itself, over what its future should even look like. This is why the appointment for the next Fed chair is such a massive deal. As you can see here, the candidates represent completely different views of the world. You've got some who want to throw out the old playbook and push for growth with new ideas, and you've got others who want to stick to the traditional, more cautious way of doing things. It's a real fork in the road for the economy. And wow,
This really shows you how deep that split is. In a recent vote on cutting rates, 6 out of 19 members voted against it. That is a huge chunk of the committee saying, nope, let's keep things tight, even as the economy is showing signs of weakness. The Fed is not one unified voice. It's a deeply divided institution.
This division is creating a major philosophical collision. The source highlights that President Trump's agenda is all about accelerating growth, hitting the gas. But the Fed's traditional speed limit model is designed to do the opposite, to constrain growth and cool the economy. It's literally like one person is flooring the accelerator while another is slamming on the brakes in the same car. That creates some serious instability.
So now, let's zoom out a bit, because this internal crisis at the Fed isn't happening in a vacuum. It's actually converging with other major national threats, and it's creating what the source calls a potential perfect storm.
And one of those huge threats is a looming Supreme Court decision about emergency tariffs. A ruling against the president's authority could, according to the source, make $200 billion in revenue just evaporate overnight. It would also strip the U.S. of a really powerful tool in trade talks. The stakes are just massive.
And this slide really hammers home the core danger. We're not just facing one isolated problem. We are facing what the source calls compound instability. You've got the outdated and divided Fed, a critical court case, massive job disruption from AI, a credit crunch for small businesses, and eroding U.S. credibility on the world stage. All of these things are swirling together and making each other worse.
So we end on this thought. The warning isn't that a crisis is coming someday. The warning is that it has already begun, silently, under the surface. And that leaves us with the one critical question. Can a system guided by a 50-year-old map possibly steer us through the unprecedented challenges of the future?